Welcome to Being Intrepid, where each conversation is a front row seat to how bold leaders are reimagining learning to meet the moment and shape what's next. I'm your host, Sam Herring. For the past 25 years, I've been building and leading learning companies to help people grow and organizations thrive. Today, I'm joined by Marilyn Allison, the Senior Director of Learning and Leadership Development at BD, a leading medical technology company where learning isn't just about compliance, it's actually a strategy activator. Now, Marilyn has a fascinating background. She earned her PhD in 18th century British literature from Vanderbilt University and began her career as an adjunct professor of English literature before transitioning into the corporate sector. I'm thrilled for Marilyn to join me today for a special conversation where we're going to take a hard look at the contradictions, the tensions, the trade offs necessary to effectively lead corporate learning today. Marilyn brings a sharp mind and a deep experience to the conversation. And I'm excited to unpack some of the challenges she navigates as BD's learning leader. Marilyn, welcome.
Thanks, Sam. It's really great to be here. Really, I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Well, let's jump right in. If you could help set the stage for learning at BD, you've shared that your role is nothing less than to enable the CEO strategy, which is really powerful framing. Can you tell us more about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to go back to the year 2000. And our CEO at the time, Ed Ludwig, did a all associate survey. And one of the things that our people wanted was more learning. So for me, BD University, which is one of the pillars that I lead at BD, is rooted in the CEO's strategy. So
Mhm.
that was just really one of the natural ways in which I approached my position to say, I'm a steward of the CEO strategy, and how do I do that through learning? So we do that through BDU, which is learning for everyone, but also through what we call our leadership accelerator programs. So pretty far reaching.
Fantastic. And we're gonna unpack this more. But let's maybe we tie this even to your experience at Vanderbilt and in academia. But could you talk about maybe a key influence or defining experience in your career that shaped your philosophy on leading learning? I'm not suggesting it has to be at Vanderbilt, but but just tell us what some of these influences were for you.
Well, I'll touch very lightly on my PhD, and then I'll pull it forward pretty quickly. But I like to say that studying 18th century British literature really prepared me for working in a corporate environment and really understanding people, what influences them, what changes them. And so, because 18th century British literature is really a lot about relationships. And one of the
Mhm.
central sort of tropes, if you will, or scenarios that you encounter is that you open maybe a piece of literature, a book, and you are introduced to a particular social circle or a family. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, somebody else comes in.
Uh-huh.
Typically from the era they came in from India pretty mysteriously.
Mhm.
But once that new element is introduced, then the unfolding of what happens, the way people relate to each other, et cetera, which I
Mhm.
find fascinating. So, like I said, I think my PhD prepared me in some way, shape, or form for the role that I'm in today. And there have been some more recent influences, I would say, as well. And I think one of them early in my career, when I first transitioned into the corporate world, which was in really more in the world of technical writing,
Mhm.
but specifically managing people. So
Mhm.
servant leadership is really one of the enablers of and influencers of the way I approach my work, very
Mhm.
much in general. I'm an enabler. I'm there to serve. I'm not there necessarily to push my agenda. I'm there to listen.
Mhm.
I'm there to collaborate and enable. And infused in that would be the agenda. How do I really push that forward? So when I think about really enabling the leaders or the CEO's strategy, I think very much my commitment to and
Mhm.
really belief in being a servant leader, one
Mhm.
who can enable
Mhm.
plays a huge part in that. And very, very specifically, there was something that happened, a realization very early on when I joined BD. So I came in through an acquisition and had just really transitioned into a learning leadership role, probably a year, maybe a year and a half before BB purchased us. And I had the awesome responsibility of leading BD University. I had really a lot of personal and professional interactions with our CEO at the time,
Mm,
which gave me a lot of insights into how BD operated, what was important to him, what he was trying to do with the company. And my realization was, I don't hear any of this outside of these probably very small four walls, if you will.
mm, mm,
And so I really had a insight at that moment. That's my job. I need
mm,
to take what he's trying to do and amplify it. And there was a very, even getting much more specifically, he used to talk about his operating model. And I thought to myself, if nobody's talking about this operating model and what the implications are and how are we supposed to act as a result of that, how is he going to really lead the company? So that's really
right,
when I embraced my role as BDU leader to say, I'm here to enable the CEO strategy, whether that is sort of the business strategy or the people strategy. So I see those as very, very closely tied. But again, if you think about that, really was a powerful influence through to me. And I'll
yeah.
just share an insight as well that when I brought this to my team, I remember someone saying, "Is that really what we're supposed to be doing? Are we allowed to do that?" And I thought, yeah, you know,
What's more important than
what's
that?
more important than that? Exactly. And
Yeah,
if
yeah,
nobody else is doing it, we're doing it. We're
right,
we're we're claiming that for
right,
ourselves. And
right,
no one, I mean, honestly, it's been one of the best decisions that we made in terms of how we really help the company.
right. I mean, what a gift to be able to have that kind of that connection, that direct connection to the CEO. I mean, I talk to a lot of learning leaders. There aren't many who
Yeah.
have that kind of direct connection. It just simplifies things so much about like you can see exactly what you need to amplify and communicate. I also love what you said, Marilyn, about servant leadership and the way you practice that. Uh, as a leader, and that's what you're also trying to have your team develop across the organization too. So I just those are really clear, simple, concrete messages that I know our audience is really going to get a lot of value out of. So we dive into some paradoxes, some of the big challenges.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds great.
Um, all right. So Marilyn, you and I have talked about a few of these. So um, let's talk about the first one. There are tensions we're all wrestling with as learning leaders today. For example, we know there's huge demand for short form learning in the flow of work at the moment of need, maybe accessible in Slack or Teams or what have you. So that's all great. And there's tons of buzz about that in the industry. Yet, as learning leaders, we know that deep learning and mastery takes place over time with practice, reflection, exposure to real world challenges. Tell us how you make sense of this trade-off at BD.
Yeah, it's a really big dilemma. There is such a push for learning in the flow of work, learning that can happen at the moment of need when I need it. And I think there's definitely a place for that, but you have to
Mhm,
balance that with the deeper learning.
mhm,
But thinking about the flow of work, I really, you're just thinking about the word flow, you
mhm.
know, you think about you don't want to be interrupted. You want to maximize your employee, or at BD we call them associate time. And
Yeah.
you know that if you have to exit what you're doing, go look for something, then come back in, you're losing time.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, and which is good, and I think we need that for efficiency's sake.
Sure.
But also that assumes a little bit more of a machine mentality in the sense of
Mhm,
we're
mhm,
mechanical, and we
mhm.
we don't want to break the flow. I worked on manufacturing lines for many, many years. You don't
Yep.
want that manufacturing line to stop because you're losing money, you're losing time.
Sure.
So I think we need to be thinking in that way, but I think if we only think in that way, then we really fail to consider the fact that we're also human. We're not
Hmm.
machines.
Hmm.
And, so we accommodate that at BD by having programs where we remove people from
Hmm.
the flow of work on purpose.
Yep.
And often what we hear is, thank you for the gift of time. It does
Hmm.
take time and it's hard to
Yep.
take the time, but it is a necessary removal of us from the flow. And it's
Yep.
purposeful so that that's where we can have the deep consideration. We can have the deep thought process. And that's where my leaders tell me their aha moments live. And that's what we need to really leaders to be thinking about and developing are the aha moments so
Yep.
that they can lead differently and more effectively moving forward. So
Yep.
we do encourage and we do build a lot of content to enable the flow of work. We're not
Hmm.
quite
Hmm.
into
Hmm.
deploying via Teams, for example, or Slack, although we are looking at it. But we do want to hold firm to that removal purposefully
Yep.
to really have our leaders think very deeply, develop
Yep.
the aha moments, and then come back and be more effective in the long run.
Yeah, and it strikes me as I'm listening to you that especially when it comes to leader development, it's not like you can just take a quick module on building trust or setting a vision and, be off and running 5 minutes later. Like those
Yeah.
are those are those are those are skills that are honed over time with
Hmm.
with practice and real world scenarios.
Exactly, exactly. You could learn something quickly about leadership, but you have to practice it. You have to talk with others. You have to remove yourself. You have to think deeply about it, reflect.
Yeah.
Reflect on yourself, reflect on your past experiences, commit to future changes. Yeah, that doesn't happen in the moment. It doesn't happen in the flow of work.
Yep. Yep. So let's talk about paradox two, and I think there's a connection here to what you just said, and it's kind of around this mechanical, efficient kind of model of learning, and this time it's about that skills are best developed through hyper personalization. So there's this kind of mantra that the promise of technology-based assessments can, capture where someone is in a particular, moment in time, and from that you can take the current state and the desired state, and you can develop a specific path for them. We'll let you comment on that in a sec. But it also, this model really centers necessarily on self-directed learning
Mhm.
and de-emphasizes or ignores perhaps collaboration, connecting with peers and experts, organizational context, and so on. What's your thought on this personalization promise, and what's your view of what that how you tackle that at BD? Maybe you've got some nuance to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something I think quite a bit about because I do think that we see a lot of, I mean, just stepping back for just a moment, we see a
Mhm.
lot of personalization in our lives in general.
Yes.
And I do think that if we over-index on the personalization,
Hmm.
it really does remove us from the human connection,
Hmm.
which I think is really, really important. So
Hmm.
as I think about and have really built our learning curriculum, honestly, I've started with the core curriculum and the connection. And really thought about what are the things that will drive the CEO's strategy from a
Yep.
business and people perspective. I think that is absolutely where we need to remain grounded, not
Hmm.
forgetting the other pieces. But to your point, it is a tension, it's a paradox. I think they have
Right.
to live in harmony together.
Right.
And even so, what's my purpose as a learning leader? I need to make sure that everybody's rowing in the same direction at BD.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you've ever been in a small little boat or a canoe and someone in that boat is not rowing in the same direction, it literally is very, very hard to get to your destination. Um, I was in a boat with my then 3-year-old daughter who was rowing in a different direction, and it getting back to shore was a labor.
Yep.
So when I say rowing in the same direction, I have a mental picture of
Hmm.
what that
Hmm.
is, what it feels like, and how
Hmm.
it can really accelerate getting to your destination.
Yeah.
So when we build our content at BDU, we start there. What are the core concepts everyone needs to know? And how do we make sure that we have a common language so that when we collaborate much more effectively? So that's where we start. We curate curriculum, so it doesn't have to be classes, it doesn't have to be the deeper learning. It also includes the quick hits. How do you
Yep.
get to BDU? How do you get to a topic? Our goal is 3 clicks and you're staring at a
Hmm.
curriculum. So we
Hmm.
want to be fast about it, but we also want to be very, very purposeful. So we start with directing them to the core concepts that will connect them into what's important at BD, that they're also rowing, we're all going in the same direction.
Hmm.
And then we level out one and we say, okay, here are some ancillary topics
Hmm.
that we still feel are very, very important, but it might not be core. That's our first level of personalization.
Okay.
And then
Yep.
and then we say also, if you want more, here's how you find it. So
Okay.
we do want them to think about personalization. And so, but we also want them to start with the core. But there will be other topics that as I think about our manager training, I still want to train them on what are the core concepts, the core expectations of being a manager at BD. But I'm also currently looking at how could I get some quick hits out via Teams so
Sure.
that if we've, let's say, kicked off goal setting, how do I give them something very quick, very in the
Yep.
flow
Yep.
about goal setting at BD?
Reinforcing and yep.
Reinforcement,
Yep. Yep.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I gotta say, I love the rowing analogy. I rode crew in college,
Okay.
and yeah, it's for reals. Like, I mean, you the concept of like, the or hitting your teammate in the back,
Oh yeah.
and or the going sideways, catching a crab, as we used to call it. Like, there's a synchronicity there that if it isn't happening, the 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 boat uh, the boat isn't successful. Put it that way.
Right, exactly. And just
Yeah.
the expenditure of energy
Yep.
unnecessarily.
Totally.
Yeah, I love the synchronicity word. I think about it as sort of that collaboration, when we come together, we're all working toward the same goal. So
Right.
we have to learn how to work together to do that. And I think hyper personalization and only sort of that over index interferes with that.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Awesome. Let's tackle our third and final paradox. There's a huge focus today on targeted upskilling in corporate learning, and for really good reason. Technologies are changing really rapidly, evolving rapidly. Workforce needs to stay abreast and develop quickly. Yet, as AI productivity accelerates, some of those skills, which are high priority today, are likely going to be executed by LLMs over
Mhm.
time, which leads us to this situation where which skills are going to endure? What are the human skills that
Yeah.
that are going to remain and be bulletproof over time? So a lot of people are wrestling with this question of like, yeah, we need the targeted technical skilling, but what are the enduring skills? Like, what's your take on that, Marilyn?
Yeah, no, I started our skills sort of journey a few years ago. Actually, I think it was probably around 2020, which gave us an opportunity at BD to step back and rebuild a number of things. Um, but I do believe the enduring skills are the people skills, are the
Hmm.
uniquely human skills.
Hmm.
I was heavily influenced by an article I had read at the time that that's where you really need to start. And because we hadn't defined some of those other more fleeting skills, I needed something to anchor us. And so I'm very anchored into the uniquely human skills, those social, emotional
Yep.
skills that I think are very enduring. And so from a modality or time commitment, cost commitment, that's where I'm putting sort of um, my emphasis, if you will,
Sure.
because that's where I think it can be highly stable.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then you think about what are the highly dynamic skills, which are now the generative AI. So,
Yep.
for example,
Yeah,
But to your point, those are skills, and we know the half life of a skill, it continues to get smaller and smaller. So
absolutely.
I certainly am going to address those, but in terms of the commitment level to them, I need to recognize that they are fleeting.
Yep.
So how
Yep.
much time and in what ways will I invest in them? And how do I stay nimble enough
Hmm.
to where those can be swapped out year to year,
Yep.
potentially
Yep.
6 months to 6 months,
Yep.
potentially? So our anchor curriculum at BDU are the uniquely human skills, those, change agility, learning agility,
Hmm.
critical thinking, for example.
Hmm.
Things we're teaching people how to learn. We're giving them sort of the tools to be, better
Hmm.
corporate
Hmm.
citizens, better, at being, being better at their jobs. But we're also supplementing that with, well, okay, what are those things you need right now? Because either it's going to be quick to upskill, but or to your point, quick to change. So we're
Yep.
we're balancing that with the curriculum. So we've got our core, again, curriculum and change agility, learning agility, critical thinking, our core to ancillary skills that
Yep.
where we direct them first. And then more recently, we are working on our like generative AI curriculum.
Hmm. Hmm.
But we always start with, the uniquely human. We address the human concerns around the skill, and then we upskill them from there.
Fantastic. And I love how you touched on the meta skill of learning to learn to navigate all those things that are coming. So,
Exactly. I think that, as an educator
yeah.
from, long back, I think, again, and maybe that's the servant leader in me. I want to
Hmm.
enable, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
and enabling people is giving them tools that they can
Right.
reuse over and over again, not something that
Yep.
has one use.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so well said. Especially in a world of dynamic change. It's
Yes.
teaching people how to learn for themselves and build those new skills and navigate for themselves.
And I think in doing that, you give them a sense of confidence as well. You
Hmm.
help them
Hmm.
ground themselves because I think one of the things that we have to think about as we lead people through this change is how do we keep them grounded? How do we keep them confident? Because with all of the change, it's easy to get overwhelmed as well. But if
Right.
there's a safe place that we can an anchor, as we've used earlier in our conversation, if we can give that to them and give them the confidence that they can pivot, they
Yep.
can handle this. They've got the core capabilities. And hopefully they'll see that the dynamic changes are things that they can handle as they come and as they go.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for going deep on those paradoxes, Marilyn, and bringing it back to your experience at BD. So, um, let's talk a little bit about your vision for the industry and your space. And if we fast forward 5 years from now, what do you think might surprise us about how leadership development may evolve?
Well, I think it has to evolve in the sense of we might need to be pivoting a lot more quickly. I know I talk
Hmm.
about the
Hmm.
anchors,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I think we might be surprised that maybe those anchors are just a little bit smaller, and maybe the dynamic
Hmm.
pieces of
Hmm.
it are a little bit sort of wider, if you will. I
Yep.
think I think one of the things that as we do fast forward, just as a learning leader, I think we have to stay agile, and I think we have to continually push ourselves to understand the new world order. What's happening? What do we hold on to? What's really important? But what are the things that are going to be changing? And how do we stay sort of ahead of those? I like to be ahead of and
Yep.
anticipating. So that I like my own timeline. I don't want to work off of somebody else's timeline. So I'm
Right.
always trying to anticipate. So I have a little bit longer runway to think it through. That might shorten out, but I do think as learning leaders, as we think about leadership development, we have to challenge ourselves first to stay
Hmm.
agile.
Hmm.
And then to your point, I mean, that's what we need out of our leaders as well. So I think we have to make sure that we're living it.
Yep.
Um, and then, our curriculum reflects it and it meets the leaders where they are and, what they need to lead more effectively.
Yep. Yep. So I'm taking away just that staying pace with the increasing agility, and finding ways to have a model of leader development that can adapt very quickly,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
that.
And I would say also just being open to input
Hmm.
on that, and
Hmm.
maybe even looking in what we might think is unlikely places.
Hmm. Hmm.
I have talked a lot with my children. I mean, they're the future workforce,
Hmm.
so I'm always interested in, what's your perspective on this, or what are you thinking about that?
Hmm.
I ask almost every associate I meet, every leader I meet for whatever question is in my mind that I'm grappling with. I
Hmm.
ask pretty much anyone who will listen and potentially, provide an answer. So just be open, keep pace, but create your sort of your sensing mechanisms and
Yes.
open the aperture on where those sensing mechanisms might lie.
Yeah, yeah. What you're saying kind of reminds me of some of Clayton Christensen's work, and Dyer, who's one of his colleagues, on the kind of the core innovation skills and
Hmm.
around networking and looking outside, reading from different places, traveling. I mean, just these exposures bring back, connections. They may seem like they're disparate and not core, but
Right.
actually they're going to bring insights for you.
Absolutely. I could probably pick out a number of examples where that has proven to be true for me. So
Yeah.
I love that. Just you and being able to make those connections and don't
Yeah.
dismiss. But I'm always looking for how did that answer help me, and I'm typically find a connection, and it's always enlightening.
For example, 18th century British literature,
I
right?
was
So
thinking the same thing.
all right, so let's close out with your advice and wisdom, for our audience, Marilyn. You've thought deeply about these learning paradoxes and have really shared some great advice about how to navigate them effectively. What do you hope other learning leaders consider as they navigate some of these paradoxes?
Yeah, I think it really dovetails to what we were just talking about is just keeping pace,
Mhm.
having your sensing mechanisms. I think in some ways, well, the world is changing, standards of excellence are changing, what success means is changing. And so not to, get too hung up on maybe, what we learned as we were rising through the ranks, and maybe
Hmm. Hmm.
not getting too attached to what works today,
Hmm.
but being open to how will things be changing and how might I need to change along with it. I'm going to bring up an example again for this, a connection of something that might seem extremely disparate. So hang with me for just a second. But
Love it.
back in 1994 Olympics, figure skating, we had the sort of the person who was really seen to be, the shoe-in for the gold, Nancy
Hmm.
Kerrigan.
Yep.
But what happened in the 1994 was Oksana Bayul came in and stole the gold medal from Kerrigan. And I thought about this a lot. And I think what it really illustrates is this undercurrent shift that was happening that
Hmm.
I wasn't paying attention to. That's not my space, but the standards were changing. What good looked like was changing. And we had
Hmm. Hmm.
the one skater who had been, would see her as maybe the old school, that
Right.
maybe in the last
Right.
Olympics, she would have gotten the gold because the standard was aligned to how she had prepared. It was aligned to her sort of
Right.
standard for excellence. But what happened in 1994 is that the shift became much more visible
Yep.
because we had someone else that seemed almost like coming out of nowhere winning the gold. So I think we have to stay vigilant. I
Yep.
think we have to look at the undercurrents. We have to go below the surface.
Hmm. Hmm.
What is happening in the world? Again, 18th century British law, what has been dropped in that
Hmm.
might change? And don't go just to the one concentric layer of change. Push your thought process even to two or three layers out, so that you start to predict so you can stay ahead of and start reading things that might not be on the surface. I think
Hmm.
that's really
Hmm.
where we need to make sure we are looking is below the surface and really pushing our thought process so that we're not surprised, so that
Hmm.
we don't have someone coming in and all of a sudden we missed the boat, or we hadn't shifted along with it, and that we get caught off guard, we get surprised. So I like I said, I just pulling in something very, very disparate, but I've
Love
thought
it.
quite a bit about that I want to make sure I've got my sensing mechanisms out there. I'm anticipating what's happening. I'm typically early in my observations. It's not always a comfortable place to be,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it does prove out, and you're much better prepared when your business leader says, "Well, what about this? Ah, I've been thinking about it. Here's my solution." I don't
Yep.
have to go back and do the research. I've been thinking about it along the way.
Right.
So that's
Right.
really where I think what I would like to just sort of leave us with in terms of my advice, if you will, or
Yeah.
it's how I've tried to operate. It's proven to be quite effective, quite helpful.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think something that we should be thinking as learning leaders.
Fantastic. I mean, starting and in the conversations, learning leaders with taking our own learning seriously and pushing that into sensing in creative and innovative ways is just an awesome place to close the conversation. So Marilyn, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights today. I've loved the conversation. This has been so much fun. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
You bet. You bet. So, listeners, if you've enjoyed today's episode, follow or subscribe to Being Intrepid wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've got your own learning paradox you're wrestling with, drop us a line. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions, chart your own course, and keep learning. Thank you.